Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. A real pleasure to welcome back to the program Shaan Sharma. He is a member of the SAG-AFTRA negotiation committee and a member of the national board, and one of at least 8, and Shaan can explain to us, one of at least 8 who voted against ratifying the contract that SAG-AFTRA negotiated with the AMPT. Shaan, welcome back to the program.
Nobody can say it. I think that's on purpose. Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, all right. So first off, just explain to us first why I said at least one of 8.
Yeah, our national board is made up of 70 national board members and 10 national officers, like the president is a national officer. And because we have 25 locals, just like the United States has 50 states, every local has a different population of our membership. So, for example, the Twin Cities local, which is North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota, only represents a little over 600 members. So their national board members' vote is weighted less than a board member from Los Angeles who represents 85,000 members. So in the boardroom, my vote is the most powerful vote amongst all of the national board members. Any LA national board member represents far more members than other locals around the country.
We should be doing that with the U.S. Senate, but that's a different that's a different story. All right, yeah. Before we get to why you voted the way you did, let's just go over for a moment, like what the elements of the deal were that SAG-AFTRA was on strike for. My understanding was basically 3 major categories, if you will, and correct me if I'm wrong. One was just basically an increase in wages. One was getting residuals from streaming services, which is a sort of a new innovation in the business model of these things. And the third was the idea of artificial intelligence, which in probably more than any other industry at this moment in the stage of AI is a real threat to the very existence, it seems to me, of of the workforce. So was those the 3 basic categories?
Yeah, those were like 3 of 5 or 6 that we really sold the strike authorization vote on back in April, May. And certainly the commitment to the membership was to come back with a wage increase that at the very least kept up with inflation, just to keep our buying power the same through 2026 as it was worth in 2020. There was a demand for an increase in streaming residuals, but that is separate from the new proposal to share in the revenue that these streaming platforms generate off of our work, where we have worked at reduced rates for 14 years to help subsidize the growth of these streaming platforms. And now all we wanted was to meaningfully participate in that revenue. And then the artificial intelligence, of course, is a huge part of this, because the right time to lock up protections, especially around something like this, is when it's in its infancy, not when it's in full maturity, where it's a huge profit center for the companies that are incentivized even more to protect it and to not give us what we need. But 2 other big things were to increase contributions to our pension and health funds, because we had a third of our members kicked off the health plan in 2020 after being sold a contract that promised to keep our health plan stronger, and it was a total lie. And then we also wanted to really improve the working conditions around self-taping our auditions at our own homes, which was necessitated by the pandemic. And so that practice has been rife with abuse and putting both the costs and the labor on the performers around auditioning. And so that was another way that we sold the strike to our members.
So let's go down. Let's keep AI for the last one. But in terms of those 5 or 6 sort of like silos, if you will, how did it come out in terms of, let's say, self-taping and the audition process?
Yeah, so that particular area is one of my areas of expertise. And on the negotiating committee, I was one of the main experts that the committee looked to for guidance on what to do in that space. I'm the chair of the LA Locals Self-Tape Work Group that developed 38 proposals to try to protect our members from abuses in that space. And a few of the things that I even wrote by hand are in this new deal. And there are a couple of things that we achieved that I'm extremely proud of, including a 48-hour minimum turnaround to turn around a self-tape that has to exclude weekends and holidays. So they can't make you work over the weekend and holidays unless you want to, but you don't have to. So our members are getting about 110 days back where they don't have to work if they don't want to. And I'm really proud of that particular thing. But on that particular section, our negotiating committee made a commitment to one another not to allow certain things to happen. And I would love to be able to be more specific, but because of the damage to auditions and self-taping that this language means, we now have to take a legal route that I can't compromise by going in any further detail. So it's one of the main reasons I am a no on this contract is the way it damages the most requested service that our members provide to productions is their auditions.
Interesting. And I can just say, like, one thing I remember is that there was always some stipulation that if you get called back, like it was like the second callback you're supposed to get paid for. That never happened. And people don't understand this dynamic that, like, auditioning is part of the job. Yeah. But it is a completely unpaid part of the job. It is, there's not a lot, interviews theoretically are, people go on job interviews, but there's far less of those than there are for auditioning. There are times, back in the day, I'm going 5 or 6 auditions, maybe a day, not getting paid for any of that. But that's my whole day. And you've got to take time off of work if you've got a second job and this and that. So that's really, I think, misunderstood by folks as to how what big issue there is. Yeah,
and that could be a whole discussion for another time because, it's been in our contract since 1937 that we're entitled to payment for an audition if we didn't book the job as a courtesy payment for the time and energy that it takes to do it. But our members don't know what's in our contract. A perfect example of that is if you have to pay for parking when you're going to an audition, they're supposed to reimburse you. Members don't know that stuff, so they never really claimed it, but it doesn't mean it's there. It's not there. It's there. It's just you only have the rights that you're aware of, really. So increasing contract literacy is a big issue that I'm working on, and so many of us are working on in the union.
And we should also say, too, that there's a dynamic here where if you get a job, particularly when you're starting out, it's like you feel like you've hit the lottery. And so the idea that you would say to the casting director, hey, I want to be reimbursed for my parking when nobody else in the room is doing that, it puts you at least a mental disadvantage. Put you
with commercial auditions. I just had a commercial audition yesterday, and you would go in to audition for a McDonald's or whatever, and sometimes the audition would run late where you're waiting there more than an hour, and you're entitled to overtime pay if they keep you past an hour at your audition. And yet actors are terrified to sign out with their actual time because even though they'll get paid, they may not get invited back to audition again. So, fear of retaliation keeps a lot of people from standing up for their rights. But if we don't push back, we don't have those rights.
Right. And that's why it's so important that when there is a provision that says, it's up to the actor, you don't want that because that's like a slippery slope down to like a race to the bottom at that point.
That is exactly why I have concerns about our AI consent and compensation proposals, but we'll get to that. All right, let's go with the pension and health fund contributions. How did that go? Well, what's one of the things we can be proud of is that we increased the pension and health contributions on 30 and 60-minute programs in a substantive way for the first time since 1980. So that is a good thing that will bring a lot of money into the pension and health plans, and hopefully enough that the trustees will be able to restore at least the seniors to the health plan that lost their coverage 3 years ago by allowing their residuals to count towards their qualifying for health insurance. That was the big thing that was a real betrayal of the seniors, is that their residuals would no longer count towards the $27,000 you need to qualify for health insurance.
Wow. Okay. And all right. And let's go in terms of wages. Where are we in terms of catching up on the sort of subsidies, essentially, the functional subsidies that actors paid to develop the streaming platforms?
Yeah, so if the commitment was made, and I believe it was, and if we go back and look at everything Duncan and Fran said, the commitment was made that the minimum for us to accept was at least adjusting for inflation. And we weren't successful in achieving that in this contract. We came in at 7%. We went in asking for 15. At the time we went on strike, we were at 11, and we ultimately settled for 7, which is 3 points lower in the first year than we would need to actually adjust for inflation. And I don't blame our union for trying to sell this as a win by the fact that it broke pattern with the DGA and WGA. They got 5% raises in their first year. We got 7. So it is a big deal to break pattern, as much as I think pattern is BS. But the commitment to the members was to keep up with inflation, and that isn't happening, except for background actors who did get a first year raise of 11%. But I think background actors are in the crosshairs of being replaced by digital replication. So for all kinds of reasons, it's easy to give a raise to people you won't need to hire very much of anymore.
And again, that's going to come in the conversation about AI. Yeah. But let's talk about the streaming. It doesn't appear to be residuals per se, but there is a sort of like a mechanism in which actors as a whole get to participate in streaming successes. Walk us through this, because this formula is, at the very least, it's different in terms of the payout, is my understanding, than the WGA and the DGA.
Well, it was, we started out by asking for something very clear, that we wanted 2% of the revenue that these streaming platforms generate off of our work. And that was going to represent about $1 billion a year in new money into our members' pockets. And then we pivoted, after fierce resistance from the AMPTP, to a 1% of revenue share in the form of a per subscriber, 57 cents per subscriber. So then that was when we went out and said, hey, for less than a postage stamp a year, you can take care of our members. And that was worth about $500 million a year. Where we ultimately landed is with a variation of what the WGA got, which is a streaming bonus, a success bonus, that only rewards us if a show is watched by 20% of the domestic subscribers of a platform in the first 90 days that it hits the platform. Now, you and I know that there are all kinds of things these platforms can do to ensure no show ever hits 20% of their subscribers in a 90-day period. They can change the thumbnail, they can bury it off the front page, they can do all kinds of things they can deplatform it at 89 days. They can do all kinds of things to make sure they never have to pay that estimated $40 million. So we went from $1 billion to 40 million. And that 40 million will have the pension and health contributions taken out of it. So you can take 8 million out of that. So that leaves 32 million estimated. That's if they even have to pay it, which I don't believe that they will have to pay. And then 75% of that will go to the cast of those shows, and 25% will go to a fund that hasn't been seated yet with trustees from both sides, that hasn't decided how it will be distributed amongst everybody else. But suffice it to say that if the goal was to make working in the streaming era and business model sustainable again, $8 million sprinkled across our membership, that really isn't going to get the job done.
And I'm sorry, even if the show is platformed and pushed to the top of the algorithm and it's on the front page, 20%, given like just the amount of shows that are on these platforms, is already way too high of a bar to clear, even in the best of conditions, it seems to me.
Absolutely, and it only applies to shows that were specifically made for streaming. So any shows that are moved over from linear television or cable don't count. Like we've been hearing how Suits has been blowing up on Netflix. Well, that would not qualify for this bonus.
Wow. I didn't realize that didn't. I mean,
but you can understand. Listen. That when the negotiating committee lost its will to keep fighting, which was a brutal thing for me to see, because our members were begging them to stay strong. They were scrambling to salvage whatever they could, and this, at least, if you listen to Fran and Duncan, gets us in a new pocket of revenue that we can expand in the future. Although Fran can't guarantee she'll be president 3 years from now when we renegotiate this, nor can we promise that will be our biggest threat and area to negotiate 3 years from now with the advent of AI and so many other things. And so if we couldn't get it while we were striking, what are the chances we're going to get more when we're not striking? So I have concerns that I don't feel like this honors what our members struck for.
I mean, I am sympathetic to the argument of like, we're in the bucket essentially. And it's really just a matter of next time we'll decide where that bucket floats down this river. But to set up this type of dynamic where there is this is the weird part about it. The streamers have no incentive to make anything a hit in that way in the first 90 days. They're going to have the content there forever. They can put it on and bury it, for the first, 75 days. And then, the way that we release a show is we seed it for 75 days, we put it in the back end, and then we start doing the campaign to promote it and have the algorithm, push it after 75 days or whatever.
As long as people don't cancel their subscriptions, they have no interest in making sure they ever have to pay that bonus. The other thing that's kind of insidious about this, and I know it was done with the good intention of at least sharing some of that money with everybody as opposed to all of it just going to the cast of these big shows. But it does pit our members against each other because the casts of these big shows are going to say, why are you taking money out of my pocket that I work so hard to be on a hit show, which is rare for any actor to be on a hit show, and give it to everybody else without even asking me, without me having a say.
Right. And that last provision is different from the WGA. I mean, I happen to like it, but I think the problem is that when you make the pie so small, the fights over the slices of that pie become much bigger.
Yeah, the lowest bar that most of us were willing to go was an additional $250 million in some kind of streaming revenue share. We asked for $1 billion, we would have settled around $250 million. But in the final days, we didn't have the strength to stand up for more than $40 million.
Honestly, I think they're sitting in those streaming offices, and it took them 25 minutes to figure out how they will pay out virtually nothing under that formula.
Yeah, and I do want to say, 3 years ago, I was part of the Dissenting Opinion 2020 campaign to oppose the last contract, and I was not a fan of that leadership and that administration. But I can tell you this time that everything was done with integrity. I have a lot of love and respect for the negotiating committee, Fran and Duncan. I think everybody did their best, but I think in the end, the threats and the pressure made them lose steam at the very moment I felt like we needed to be strongest in kind of this back end, the 5-yard line. And I don't think that we exhausted all of our tools or leverage or at our disposal to kind of get what we needed in that moment. But the system did operate with integrity. It's up to the members to decide whether these good people who tried their best is acceptable or not. And
we should say, and I still want to get to the AI, but I think the pressure with the WGA ending their strike, the pressure becomes extraordinary because when the writers aren't writing, there's no after a while you don't have this backlog of content and you can't get the actors in there. But once the writers start writing, there is a couple of weeks before they start to produce some of these the content, and the process can then begin at that point. All right, let's go to AI because this is this also seems really problematic. And in terms of who knows if there's going to be how many streaming platforms there's going to be in 3 or 4 years. It's quite possible there may be a reversion because they've made a lot of big mistakes, these companies, in terms of AI, this seems to be something that is definitely going to be in the future, and it's going to be definitely existing. And anything you do today is almost irreversible because of the nature of what they're talking about, which is why I think it's so important.
Which is why getting protections in generative AI were so important, which we really failed to get. Which is where they can ingest all of our performances, all of our previous work, our behavior, our photos, our voices into a model, and then spit out a synthetic performer that has little trace pieces of all of our DNA. But unless it's recognizable in terms of a specific facial feature, that's what was so disappointing about what we got in this space, this kind of token protection that swayed some of our negotiating committee members at the 11th hour to vote yes, was they thought we achieved more meaningful protections in this space. But you have to look at this synthetic performer that was made in the meat grinder of everybody's data and say, hey, that's my nose, that's my eyes, that's my lip. Unless you can recognize clearly a facial feature of a natural performer, we don't have any control over what they do with that synthetic performer. And who's going to be able to prove it's my lips and not your lips? So for me, the real aim was to say they can't use our characters' names, they can't use our names, and they can't use our performances or anything that has to do with us in a generative AI model without our consent and compensation, and we failed to get that protection.
I mean, because that's basically like we're hiring non-union workers. I mean, we're hiring non-union actors. We're allowed to hire non-union actors. It just so happens that we created them, and they're from.
And you know what's even worse about the synthetic performers, Sam, is it says that they can do that with all non-human characters. So any aliens, any fantasy creatures, any animal creatures, whatever. All of those used to be performed by our members doing performance capture, things like that. Those can all be synthetic under the terms of this contract.
The thing about this, too, that I think has even more resonance is that when we talk about, there's a lot of pressure because a lot of, there's obviously a lot of like other people who work on productions who they're not on strike, but because the actors are on strike, these productions aren't happening. This AI stuff is a threat to Yahtzee. It's a threat to it's a threat to the grips, to the ADs, it's a threat to everybody who works on a production, because it starts with, we don't need to hire any actors for this, and very quickly devolves into like, we don't even need to leave the studio. In fact, we don't even need to leave this office. And everything becomes basically animation at that point.
That's right. And not only does it threaten crew, it threatens our own members. I mean, there are certain professions that are now just going to be unviable. And one of them is voice matching. We had a whole community that would, do ADR and looping for performers who couldn't come back and do that for themselves, that would voice match, say, Denzel Washington, or voice match Allison Janney or whatever. And, now they can just use their voice clone and pay the original actor, and puts all those voice actors out of work. I have concerns about loop groups and walla groups that do the background sounds that you hear when you're in a show. I have concerns about dancers and singers who can just be now, done with synthetic performers using synthetic voices and voice clones. I'm concerned about stunt performers, because in our language it says that if anything is incapable of being performed without serious threat to life and limb, that they can use a digital replica, which is largely what stunt performers do, is the dangerous stuff that could be threatening to life and limb. So I think that so many of our categories that we represent may be harmed by this, including background performers, who I can't see a reality now in which they hire any more than the required count that's in our contract. So they have to hire a certain number of background actors, but beyond that, they can use all replicas. So yeah, I have serious concerns about our AI protections.
And this does not reverse. I mean, this is not like we didn't get the 12% we wanted and we only got, 7%. And next time we can take a bigger bite. There's no way to reverse this. Like, once this is in the system, once this is set up, it's almost the opposite of the streaming sort of like a pitch, which is, well, we've created a structure where we participate. Next time we come back, we want to participate more. This AI thing sets the markers and basically says this is going to be the dynamic. And once that dynamic is set, I don't see how you go backwards on that.
Yeah, and the way this works is it's really only going to provide protections to the most successful, recognizable star actors. For anybody who's not recognizable, not a name, now they're going to be competing against everyone dead and alive who can be de-aged, who their estates can license their synthetic or their digital replica to a studio. I think we just saw that Edith Piaf is being resurrected for a new film with her voice and her likeness, and it's just going to be the start. And so, yeah, I'm very concerned about how this affects performers who don't have the leverage to fight for themselves or are not recognizable. Because what's the difference between a synthetic performer who doesn't resemble a natural person and a unknown actor who people don't know, from Adam themselves? So yeah, I really worry about those who are newer in their careers. It's
going to be creepy when all of our stars are synthetic. They're not actual human beings.
Or when people become huge fans of a completely synthetic character.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
In the influencer space, we have completely artificial AI generated influencers with hundreds of thousands of followers, and they're not even real people, but people fall in love with them and want to see what they do, and that's going to happen in our space.
But the upside of that is, of course, it's going to be much less expensive for the consumer to go and see these things, right? I mean, of course not. That's the thing, is that this is not a situation where we're talking about automation that's going to allow, people to, you're going to be able to have a full, 4-course meal now, and it's going to be, more accessible to people.
And,
there's not a dime of savings on the consumer. There's no value to the consumer to this whatsoever. This is exclusively about putting more money in the pockets of really, ultimately, these tech companies.
Well, and we may find that we really enjoy certain parts of this synthetic, AI created, content. But one of the things that I think our community can take some heart in is that storytelling is always the most important thing. We didn't know the actors in Squid Game, and it became the #1 show on Netflix. We didn't know the actors in Parasite, and it was an award-winning film. Even the show that I'm on, The Chosen, has no name star actors, and it's one of the top shows on the planet. So it's really storytelling at the end of the day that means the most. And I do think that there is a sincere desire from humans to see humans in storytelling, and that we do want to celebrate human achievement. And I actually think that any performances that are digitally altered by AI shouldn't be eligible for awards, because you should have to be able to do the performance yourself in order to qualify for an acting award, for example.
All right. So what happens now? In a day or two, right? We're going to get these postcards. I'm a member of SAG-AFTRA myself. We're going to get postcards. I think it's like a 2.5 week period or 3 week period where there can be ratification. How do you get your message out with, what obligation does the union have to say, here are the dissenting views on this?
They don't have any obligation to do that. We have a national board policy that if a third of the board were to vote no, then we could consider including a minority report, which we did put in the 2020 referendum booklet. But with only 14% of the board voting against at this time, that wasn't even a topic of discussion. Also on that note, the national board meeting was so short that I can assure you that I would bet that almost all of the national board members voted on something that they didn't understand. We were given only 2 hours to review it. We begged for an extension by an hour. It took 3 hours just for our team to explain what was in the summary, and they had already scheduled a press conference immediately after the meeting. So I encourage any member to go reach out to their national board members and ask them if they fully understand all of the provisions in this new deal. I promise you they won't be able to answer, and will pass you off to staff. So I have huge concerns that the national board just rubber stamped what the negotiating committee recommended and didn't provide proper oversight to this deal. So the members are now the final kind of defense against making a critical error. So I don't think the member ratification process is perfunctory or symbolic. I think every member has a duty to read the details for themselves and weigh the pros and cons. There is a lot of good in this deal. It fills $1 billion of potholes from the failures of past negotiations, and they have to figure out whether it's acceptable for them or not. For me, it's not, based on what I witnessed, and I was in the front row seat and had a hand in creating what it is that I have to vote against today. So that's all I think. The union has everybody's email and home address and phone number. We're going to get postcards and emails and robocalls and videos, everything saying vote yes. And that's understandable. That's what their majority of their national leadership told them to do. And every good union member is going to want to trust their leadership and vote yes. And in this case, their leadership is trustworthy. They're great people who tried their best. I just think that we fell short and fell apart in the last few crucial weeks that did a lot of damage to certain communities of our union and other contracts in the mad scramble to close a deal to make Bob Iger happy on his Q3 earnings call. And I just can't get down with that. I can't support that. I don't think that that was necessary. And I think especially the AI piece represents existential threats. So how do I get my message out? I'm here talking to you. I'm talking to other press outlets that are interested in my point of view, but I can't compete with the communications department of the union. The only thing that I can hope for is that enough people vote no, that at least the AMPTP and our union leadership recognize that it wasn't perfect and that members are paying attention.
Yeah, and I got to say, I think we certainly have been trying to get you on before the vote, so we had no idea ultimately that what your perspective was on it. this has not been, I don't even think the full, sort of material of the contract has been released until maybe today. And so we had no idea. Let me just lastly, like from your sense, I mean, obviously, I don't know how specific you feel about getting comfortable about this, but like, what were the elements that increased this pressure? I mean, I only had able to go out once a week on my day off to go to the picket lines, but I saw things were, there weren't the numbers there were, 2 months ago. Or 3 months ago, before the writers had stopped, but there were still some people out there. Actually, by the time we get to like noon on the East Coast. But give me a sense of what pressures were out there.
Oh, sure. We had pressure from A-list celebrities. I mean, there were some who were trying to be very helpful and were very helpful, back channeling and offering to, pay more in dues and things like that were very appreciated. They just didn't understand how our contract worked. So it wasn't really something we could do in this moment that would solve our problems. But we had other celebrity A-listers going out there and putting pressure on us to just take the deal right now. What's unfortunate about listening to those successful A-listers is they don't work for the minimum terms of our contract. They all have their own contracts and teams and often are producers, et cetera. So, I'm more concerned about those who actually work the contract and their opinions than those that don't work the contract and just want to get back to work as producers and high-level A-list stars. There was also pressure, of course, which everybody should and would feel, of the cost to our community, to our sister union members, to our own members. We had crew that were caught in the crossfire here because they didn't choose this strike, but they were trying to be good sister union members to us. But lots of crew and production people got really harmed by this. Even some people sadly took their own lives. Like, it was not good. We felt that pressure every single day. But the leaders of those unions were also incredibly supportive, saying the better you do now, the better we're going to do next year when IATSE and Teamsters go to the table for themselves. But I think really the pressure was when the AMPTP and the CEOs threatened to cancel the rest of the shows for this television season. And some of the shows that they had threatened to cancel would have impacted members of the negotiating committee. So I have a concern that in the future we should not seat the negotiating committee with anybody who's actively employed on an AMPTP production, because it represents a conflict of interest of being able to stand up for everybody or just trying to protect your own employment. And then there was this weird thing about how they valued their package, which to me exposed a really sad, I guess, blind spot of our own team, which is, if you remember back in July when we declared the strike, the AMPTP said they offered us $1 billion package. And here we are now saying we got $1 billion package. So what did we actually gain over the last 4 months? Well, the truth is that we gained a lot economically, about $240 million, but that's because our team values the July package at $775 million, not $1 billion. So why the discrepancy? It's because the AMPTP was applying the 7% raise to everybody who works overscale as well. So they were making the case that paying an actor $10 million a picture, they're now going to have to pay them 7% more. And so they're factoring that cost into the raise. But in what world does increasing minimum wage by 7% increase our salaries if we're making 50, 60, 70, 80 grand a year? So it was their kind of funny money, fuzzy math to try to claim that they were offering us more than they actually were. But the fact that our team didn't know that was really disappointing, because it makes it sound like we didn't really get much when we go out and tell the members we got $1 billion. But I do want to make this very clear. The strike was absolutely essential and worthwhile. If we would have signed what was on the table in July, our AI protections wouldn't be anywhere near where they are. We wouldn't have to have this fund, for example, with even as underwhelming as it is for me, we still wouldn't even have that, nor a number of other economic things and non-economic things that we got. So everybody who sacrificed should know 100% that the strike was worthwhile and essential. I'm just not happy with the way that we closed the deal, how we got off the strike, and what I witnessed over the last 3 weeks of the negotiations.
Shaan Sharma, member of the SAG-AFTRA negotiating committee and the member of the national board. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. You've been really an invaluable resource for us throughout the strike, and we can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks. we are going to clip that segment with Shaan right after the show, so that if you have friends who are actors, you can send it to them. This is a vote that, like, I mean, any minute we're going to get emails as members of that union, letting us know that it's time to vote on it. They're sending out the ballots. I'm checking right now because I usually get a lot of updates from them. But send it out. It's really it's a very difficult situation because there are a lot of people who are out of work and have been out of work for a long time, and crew members who trying to figure out how they're going to get through this holiday season and beyond and whatnot. But
I appreciated the discussion of the casting stuff and like the union sticking up for that, because I mean, I remember job hunting just for this profession, and Business Insider, I'll name specifically, I did so much free work for that company.
Yeah.
Do give me 800 words on 3 different articles and submit that for a job that would pay probably $32,000 a year.
Yeah.
I never really considered that in acting, but it makes a lot of sense, and that's horrible. Like, I can't imagine something that I can't act at all. We tried to do the Halloween stuff. I just can't really get it. It's a type of vulnerability I can't get to, and to have to go through that. Oh shit! I have to ask for parking because I'm fucking broke.
Well,
and that sort of stuff is crazy.
I mean, the interesting thing is, I will say that that's part of the reason. We haven't had to go out for the AM quickie too much, but when we do for some people anyways, we've done write a test thing and then we paid. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's something to actually recognize there's some work being done. But you could go out on audition. First off, and it's obviously changed that, and when I was in the business, there was a 4-month period of time in pilot season where it was constant. You would go on 3 auditions a day. And if you're in LA, and one's in Venice, and one's in Studio City, and one's out in in Hollywood, that's your whole day, and you're putting I don't know how many miles, it's gas and all of this, and you're not going to go in there, and it's a weird industry because so much of it is you're selling yourself and your personality and a perspective. You're acting the moment you get into that. You're not necessarily acting as the character, but you're acting as somebody who's showing a certain amount of confidence, and you don't want to get in there and say hey, can I have the $7 for the parking? Because and
I'm auditioning for billions.
You don't want to piss off the person who could give you money and hire you, change your life.
Yeah, I mean, the casting director, you need to get past. The casting director is one threshold, and the person next to you or the other person next to you is not doing it, and so you don't want to put yourself at a disadvantage. There's a lot of it's almost it's the value of a minimum wage, is that there's not unfair competition amongst the people who are willing to undercut other people, but I don't know. That's
and that undercutting, it also you see a lot of this stuff come up in Hollywood of actors who come from actors and say, why do we have to talk about nepotism? It's because of these things. To the extent that we can address these sorts of insecurities that make it so you can produce your own great reel at home with proper editing and lighting and send that in at a timely basis, as opposed to somebody who has to maybe, I don't know, book studio space with what remaining money they haven't paid for rent. And
yeah, the self-taping is also really, is difficult too, because that's a function of how much of that stuff you have, and it's not easy to set all that stuff up. But all that said, I'm getting challenged by Mark Wayne, a guy named Mark Wayne who wants to go right now, wants to fight me right now. Folks, it's your support that makes this show possible. You can become a member by going to jointhemajority.report.com. When you do, you not only get the free show, free of commercials, but you also get the fun half. And you not only get the fun half, you get the ability to I am the fun half. The app is free for everybody at majorityapp.com, but it has special features. You unlock an upgrade or whatever you call it. What is it? What is that called in the game?
Level up.
You level up by
Took a shot.
I am
Unlocked an
the show.
upgrade.